All right, fantastic. Recording is happening. Good morning, everyone. For those of you that are in the same time zone as me, I'm dialing in from London. For those of you that are in other countries, as I mentioned, drop in the chat where you're dialing in from if you haven't already. My name is Eliza. This is my first CiC webinar. So if you haven't seen my face before, that's because I am relatively new to CiC. Let me know, has anyone come along to any of the previous free webinars before that Harry has run? Or first time today? I can see a couple of nods of heads. First time, Joe, wonderful. Fantastic. Well, lovely to meet you all. My name is Eliza. I am a registered psychologist, have recently relocated to London from Australia, if you didn't catch from my accent. I've been told I have a very strong Australian accent that I'm working on softening. So I've recently come across to CiC. I am the clinical consultancy manager at CiC. My background is in organizational psychology. Has anyone heard of organizational psychology? Some nods, some no. That is absolutely fine. You may have heard of clinical psychology. That's generally where what we think of when we think of psychology. That's the one-on-one counselling support. Organizational psychology is thanks, Vicky. Organizational psychology is really the science of people at work. We spend an awful lot of our life at work. So I personally love what I do because we get to think about how we can create really healthy workplaces that promote and foster employee well-being. And we also know that work is really good for our well-being as well, because it gives us structure, purpose, routine. So it absolutely goes both ways there. So my role at CiC is to look at kind of anything other than the standard EAP. So CiC, most of you, I'm assuming, would have CiC as your EAP at your workplace. So that's that one-on-one counselling support, but we also do a lot of group training sessions, coaching, also development of things like peer support programs, etc. Today I'm running a session on resilience, which is one of the topics that I love to talk about, and I'm so glad there's been so much interest in this session. I think resilience is one of those things that gets thrown around a lot in the wrong context sometimes. And it's, a term that is used sometimes to say kind of, oh, well, the employees just need to be more resilient and they need to sort of toughen up. And that is not what resilience is at all. However, it is a really, really fantastic and important asset that we can build in ourselves that is useful in the work context, but also in our personal lives as well. All right, Carol, I hope it works. Thank you. Just keeping up with what's going on in the chat. So we've got an hour together this morning to talk around what is resilience, how do we build it in ourselves, and why would we want to in the first place? So we'll touch on what are some of those benefits. And then we'll talk about, well, how do we actually create sustainable behaviour change? Because unfortunately, I'll put it out there right now that we cannot build resilience in a 1-hour webinar. I'm sorry if you thought you dial in today and that was what you were going to get from it. We absolutely can start that conversation and start talking about what's working well. I'm also not, I am sure that I'm not talking to a room of people that have zero resilience. So you're already on that journey, but it's thinking about what are some of those things that you can keep doing, potentially some new things that you might want to start doing, and what are some of those things that are maybe derailing you and getting in the way that we might want to stop doing or reduce doing. So that is my remit today. Pop in the chat if there's anything in particular that you really wanted to get out of today's session, that the reason, that you signed up. Again, you can message it to me individually at any point in the session. If you've got private comments and questions, I won't read out your name, but I'll read out the question. And just remember, if you're thinking of asking that question, it's more than likely that one of the other 144 people on the call is interested or thinking the same thing. But I will be throwing questions out to you as we go through. So you can either sit and reflect and not engage in the chat, but also you can type and respond that way. Wonderful. Thanks, Carol. Any luck? Hopefully it's working better and you can hear me okay. All right. So first of all, I want to just do a bit of a check-in. It's Friday morning, 10 a.m. where I am in the UK. How are you feeling right now? And the reason that I ask that is that this is one of those really, really important skills when it comes to resilience, is this idea around self-awareness, around checking in with ourselves and having that internal dialogue around how are we feeling? Are we feeling a little bit tight today? Are our stress levels a little bit higher than usual? Yes, tired and cold, ready for the weekend, tired. All of that kind of regular conversations with ourselves ensures that we can then do something about it. If we are feeling tired, all right, we're noticing that. Well, what are some of those things that I can do potentially today or over the weekend in order to regroup, rest? But if we don't know that we're feeling tired or feeling stressed or feeling cold, then we can't do anything about it. Yeah, bit tired, looking forward to a long weekend. Feeling pretty good, had a good productive week and looking forward to a fun weekend. Absolutely. So that kind of initial check-in with ourselves at the start of the day is always a really good time to do it, but regularly throughout the day as well can send our message to ourselves of, oh, haven't actually gotten up and moved in a few hours. I've been sitting at my desk. Maybe I'm just going to go stretch the legs, make a cup of tea, go for a walk around the block. So regularly doing those kind of activities throughout the day is really helpful. Yes, it is Friday, Teresa. How exciting. So, stress, that came through a little bit in the chat as well. Now, we can experience stress for a whole number of reasons. Stress is a really, really normal experience for us as humans. Up on the screen, you'll see what is called the stress curve. Has anyone seen this before or heard of this before? Pop in the chat just a Y or an N for yes or no, and absolutely okay if you've never seen it before. Oh gosh, the chat has gone bananas. Here we go. Interest for me. Thank you. Yeah, someone just popped in the chat what they're really looking to achieve today. Wonderful. No, yes, no, yes. So, for those of you that have seen this stress curve before, it might have been in a number of different contexts. Sometimes it gets used when we think about professional athletes and optimal performance and managing stress. For example, if you think about Olympic athletes when they're, training up for a big race, they want to perform at their personal best on that race. And in order to do that, they generally need to have moderate levels of stress. So we're not all professional athletes. I personally am not. But this stress curve is also applicable for the rest of us. And we can think about it from a work perspective, but also in our personal lives. So along the bottom, we've got demands. So low demands on the left-hand side or high demands on the right-hand side. And then we've got performance coming down the vertical axis here. Now, as we see, when we've got low levels of demands, so we're not required to do a whole lot, we have low levels of performance. Now, this is not really an issue if it's Friday afternoon and we're unwinding and we're sitting on the couch and we're relaxing with our family. We don't need to be performing in any way. In fact, that's our rest and our recovery time. So we want to be sitting down, that bottom left-hand corner of the graph. Does anyone want to pop in the chat and if they, if we've got an individual in a work context that's always experiencing low levels of stress, what might be going on for that person? What might be happening in that situation? Yep, absolutely. So they might be feeling bored, lack of stimulation, organizational change, David. Yep. Fed up or no interest, stuck in a rut. Yeah, absolutely. You guys are all over it. So there might be a number of things happening. It might be that they're not feeling challenged by the work they're doing. They might be just not interested in the work they're doing. They might have too much work and gone the other way and they've kind of just checked out of that work as well, not fulfilled in the job. Exactly. So we're not going to see an individual do amazing things. They're not going to reach their full potential and they're not going to be performing at their best in that environment. As demands increase to a moderate level, so we're moving along that graph and we're hitting the top, that's where motivation grows. We care about the work that we're doing. We're feeling fulfilled and challenged, but we also have the resources to meet that. So we have kind of a supportive team around us, and that's where we're going to perform at our best. Now, same thing if we go back to those professional athletes. They're aroused, they care, they've worked really hard for that, but they're not letting that kind of anxiety get the better of them. When we don't have opportunity for rest and recovery, we will drop off the other side of this graph. And that's where we feel like those demands, we don't have enough resources to meet that. And that stress increases. And that's where we see that exhaustion, fatigue, and burnout. Let me know if you've got any questions on that stress curve. But ultimately, it's a really, really normal response, stress. And as we can see, moderate levels of stress is actually where we perform at our best. So it's highlighting that stress is not always a bad thing. However, we can't sit in that optimal performance zone forever. We need to go back and have periods of rest and recovery in order to manage that. Stress is super, super normal. It is not a bad thing at all. But long periods of stress are when there is issues there. If we think about pressure and stress, it can be caused by things in our work environment, but also things at home. So there's really a number of different things that are going to be contributing to how we're feeling. And signs of stress will look different for everyone. So for one individual, stress might come out as being really irritable. I personally, my family can attest, I'll be a little bit snappy if I'm feeling stressed. So we're behaving differently. You might find that your concentration is really impacted as well. And you might find your emotions as well. You might be more erratic in your emotions, even suddenly sort of teary or angry. And that's really, really normal for us to have those different reactions to signs of stress. Now, signs of stress is different for everyone. But I want you to just reflect now and feel free to share in the chat for me if you like. What signs do you notice in yourself when you're feeling under pressure and feeling stressed? What are the first things that you notice? It might be some of those things that are up on the screen right now. So you might be trouble sleeping. You might have kind of really racing heartbeat or really short, shallow breaths. Oh, so many coming through. Trouble sleeping, heart racing, restless, tightness chest. Yep. Now, The reason that I'm going on about this again, when you're thinking, what does this have to do with resilience, is again about this self-awareness piece. So the sooner that we can pick up on these early indicators that we're feeling stressed, the sooner that we can do something about it, and we can manage that in a helpful way. And that is where resilience comes in, is that it's not that an individual doesn't experience stress when they're resilient, it's that they can quickly manage and respond to that stress. You might also find changes in appetite and you're feeling stressed, and that can go both ways. You can find that people really reach for, the sweet, sugary snacks, or you can have kind of a complete decrease in appetite. Lack of concentration is a really, really common one. Withdrawing socially as well, might find that you kind of recluse from that environment. Again, really normal. So again, as I mentioned, it's not that an individual who is resilient doesn't experience this stuff. We will always experience some level of stress, but it's thinking about how we quickly become aware of that and then respond to that that's really helpful. So, resilience. As I mentioned at the start, pet peeve of mine is when it gets used in the wrong context. And it's that term that gets thrown around as, our staff are struggling, let's just run a resilience workshop. They need to be more resilient. When potentially the root cause of that is, they're actually under-resourced. The leadership needs some additional capability in kind of managing mental health in the workplace. There might be some poorly managed organizational change. So running a resilience workshop isn't actually addressing the root cause there. However, before I put up kind of the official definition, I want to just ask you to think of the most resilient person you know. So when you hear that word resilient, who comes to mind for you? Now, it might be a friend, family member, colleague, someone in the media, but I want you to think who comes up in your mind, and then I want you to pop in the chat, what is it about that person that made you think of them? What kind of characteristics do they have? What is it about them, their behaviors, their mindset potentially? What kind of things do they do that made you think of that person? Yeah, someone who cares less, Alison, so less fazed by what other people kind of think of them. Nothing fazed them whatsoever, cool and calm attitude, never flipped out or overreacted. Yep. Positive, Liz. Yeah, absolutely. So that mindset piece. Wow, so many coming through. Sorry, apologies, I won't be able to read out them all. Bouncing back from major setbacks, definitely. So that's a really, really important attribute, is how quickly an individual can kind of move on from a difficulty or a challenge, and we're not dwelling in that. Calm, positive, ability to cope, has been through so much but withstands it all and keeps going. Ivy, absolutely. Get up and go, doesn't worry about how others perceive them. Calm and consistent. Yeah, absolutely. So this stuff is exactly what resilience is. The official definition from the American Psychological Association is the process and outcome of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experience. So absolutely that acknowledgement that life is challenging sometimes. There will be bumps along the way. It's how we adapt to those. It's not avoiding all difficulty. It's how we adapt, especially through that kind of mental and emotional flexibility. So managing that and adjusting to the different demands. So it's really thinking about how we can change positively and recover from those difficulties there. It's not about never enduring stress. as I mentioned, and it's not, resilience is not necessarily a characteristic that we're born with or not. It is something that we can build over time through intentional practices and techniques, which is a fantastic thing, because it means that we actually can do something about it, and we can make behavioral changes and build in these strategies that I'll talk about, to further enhance our resilience. It is something that can be practiced anywhere, anytime, but as I mentioned up front, it's not something that we can just work on once and set and forget. It really does need that constant attention and effort. Yes, absolutely, Trisha. So there is some genetic component to resilience. There's still a fair bit of research to go on kind of mapping out exactly what that interplay is, but that's the whole nature nurture debate, really. But there is a combination of some genetic component, but also definitely an ability for us to enhance that as we go. Adversity can unintentionally yield positive changes, and this is one of the really amazing things about resilience, is that it can change how we see challenge and adversity, because we can then see that as an opportunity for growth, instead of just getting really caught up in negative thinking patterns. So, what is called post-traumatic growth theory? There was a whole bunch of research that was done looking at people that had gone through significant trauma in their life, whether that was cancer battle, whether that was grief or loss, significant conflict, socioeconomic challenges. And looked at these individuals and what happened over time to their resilience. And it found that these individuals, not everyone, but certain individuals that had gone through these challenges, they had actually come out the other end quite different as individuals, and it had shifted a lot of what they found important in life, their values, potentially a career change as well. So you might see someone that has gone through a significant trauma kind of reevaluating their life, and pursuing things that were different to what they were doing before. They might leave their job and go on to do motivational speaking, or something that they're really, really passionate about, which is absolutely really, really enhances this opportunity that going through difficulty and adversity absolutely in the short term and medium term can be extremely challenging, but there can be opportunity there, for further growth for us in the long term, which is really, really fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. Kelly can relate to that. So thinking about that broad definition of resilience, it's far more than just enduring and being able to handle whatever comes our way. It's much more complex, and it's thinking about how we do manage those situations, our mindset, absolutely, and also how quickly we can bounce back from that. And again, as we go, pop questions into the chat if there's any that come through, and there's also a Q&A function that I'm just going to open up as well, so in case anyone pops anything in there. We'll see how we go for time as well, and we can do some questions at the end. So why should we want to develop resilience? Well, I'm probably don't really need to sell it too much more, as I'm sure you're all interested as if you've signed up to this session, and are spending time to kind of learn more about it. But there are huge benefits of enhanced resilience. Yes, absolutely, it enhances how we respond to change and uncertainty. And I think if the last 2.5 years, well, I can't believe I'm saying 2.5 years now since COVID has started, if that has shown us anything, is that change is a constant in this modern world. and that level of uncertainty as well around what the future holds doesn't sit that well with us as humans. We like to know what's ahead of us. So ensuring that we can manage and adapt to change and uncertainty is really beneficial. Greater self-awareness allows us to remain calm under pressure, think clearly in times of crisis, have an increased sense of purpose, healthier relationships, improved optimism attitude, and also there's some key links there to improved physical health outcomes as well, which is really fascinating. So again, just to really reinforce why we would want to develop it. So how do we actually build it? Just like going to the gym to work on our physical fitness, or going for a walk or eating healthy foods, this is much more about a lifestyle. That consistency in utilizing these strategies is what will bring the greatest level of sustained resilience. Unfortunately, if we just work really hard on it for 2 weeks, we might see that short-term change, but not that long-term game. And I'll talk in the next little while about how we can actually have that long-term behavior change as well, and forming healthy habits. The first thing that we can do to enhance our resilience is to get really, really clear on our vision and purpose as individuals. Now, what I mean by that is what's important for you as an individual? What are the things that drive you, that make you feel fulfilled and happy? Because our personal values shape our experience of the world. And what research has shown is that when we're consciously connected with what's important to us, those can really buffer our experience of stress when we know what's important to us. So literally having that conscious awareness of our values can stop our brain producing overwhelming amounts of cortisol, which is one of the stress hormones. And that ensures that we can think clearly, we can make rational decisions. So really from a chemical perspective, when we're consciously aware of what is important to us. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that, Trisha. Yeah, absolutely. So that's that post-traumatic growth theory that we were talking about. So in addition to knowing, or having that kind of conscious awareness of what is important to us, when we know what's important to us, i.e. family, loyalty, trust, there's a whole heap of values out there. In addition to that, it means that we can choose to make decisions that are aligned with our highest priority values. And we're more likely to do them willingly and gain that sense of satisfaction and happiness. So being clear on what is meaningful to you is really important. Now, pop in the chat for me. Has anyone ever done any values exercises before, or spent time kind of assessing what are their most important values? And again, absolutely fine if you haven't. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a formal kind of exercise, but I find that easiest. There is, yeah, absolutely, Lizzie, you've done one. And again, it's probably, in that guided practice or in a forum. But if you just Google, if you're interested, feel free to do it after this session. If you just Google kind of values exercise, there's heaps online. Generally, there'll just be a kind of a table or a list of a whole bunch of values, and it'll get you to kind of pick out what are the top 3 values for you. Now, it's a difficult exercise because you kind of have to weigh up, but that one is important too. But, it ensures that you really have to cut through and think about, well, what is it that drives me and that brings me the greatest satisfaction? and then determine what are those, top 3 values, so that we can then, when we're in tough situations, we can think, well, what is going to be more aligned with our values? And it can really help us make some clear decisions there. Oh, if you just Google, values exercise. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Joe. Because then we can create goals that help us align to those values. For example, if family is a top value for you, for me personally, that's definitely a top value of mine. And if you're in a situation, potentially, I'll use a work example. If you're working for an organization who requires you to be online 24/7, there's really poor kind of flexibility around picking up your kids from school, or if there's family commitments that you need to have a flexible work arrangement with, if that's not supported by your workplace, but family is a top value for you, then there's a kind of misalignment there. And that, again, helps us understand why we might not be feeling potentially satisfied in that situation. And it also means that we can have those conversations. Now, we might not always have perfect alignment with our values and our workplace, but ensuring that we can have those open conversations with our manager, with our team around, what are some of those things that are really important to you. Now, another example of a value might be respect. That might be something that's really important to you, or teamwork. Now, again, if you're working in an environment where, you have to work autonomously a lot, but you are really passionate and satisfied with teamwork and team environments, then again, it's no surprise why you might not be feeling very satisfied there. So thinking about what are those values. Now, if you want to spend a bit more time going through that exercise after the session, go for it. But if you want to just jot in the chat for me, is there anything that comes to mind straight away as your kind of top values? I'd love to hear it. If you want to share, pop it in the chat. Some of those values. Again, if this is a new concept and you're not really sure what to choose from, I just encourage you to spend a bit of time after the session. Yeah, honesty. There we go. Absolutely. Now that's something, again, who are we surrounding ourselves with? Are the people that we spend time with, is that important for them as well? Yep. Same with respect, professionalism, kindness. Yep. Absolutely. Fantastic. So really thinking about what are those things that drive you and that are meaningful to you. So the values piece is that key overarching strategy that really will enhance resilience. The second thing that's really important is how we regulate our emotions. And the reason that is goes back to when we're talking about what resilience is we will experience some level of stress as humans, no matter how resilient we are, but it's how we regulate our emotions and how we respond to that stress or that challenge. So often we think that an event happens, for example, I'm trying to think of an event that might create some level of stress for us. Okay, so we find out that a piece of work that we thought was due next Friday is now due on Monday, right? So we've just been received that news, and often we'll think that that event causes us to feel a certain way. So that event happens, and that has caused me to feel stressed or overwhelmed or angry or frustrated. However, there actually is something else going on there. It's not as simple as an event and I now feel this way. And does anyone want to have, again, pop in the chat for me, if there's any any ideas around what might be going on in there that is also determining how we feel? Sorry, trying to keep up with what's going on in the chat. Um, so if we think about what's happening there, it is how, yeah, absolutely, pre-expectations, predispositions, basically all of our experience in life to that point will shape how we respond to that situation. Also, things like how much sleep we had the night before, whether we've already had kind of a rough morning, potentially we've had an argument with our loved one, all of those other things are going to impact how we respond to that situation. Yep, absolutely, Charlotte. So stress level before the event, yeah, trivial things, because it might be kind of just that final straw, isn't it? And we can notice that we kind of respond really differently there. So what we're seeing there is it's a bit more complex than this situation happened and I now feel stressed. There's a lot that goes on between there that impacts how we respond to that situation. And you might notice this, you might notice that some days you might receive, less than ideal news, and you sort of respond and you roll with it. It's like, yeah, that's all right. I can manage, I can adapt. Whereas if you receive that same news on a Monday morning, feeling a bit tired, potentially the way we respond is differently. So thinking about what is going on there, it means that we actually have some control here. And our control lies in how we respond to that situation. Now, if we can slow down and think about, all right, this situation has happened. I have a choice in how I respond to that situation. I have a choice in how I then end up feeling about that situation. Now, that is, easier said than done in some situations, absolutely. But some useful things to ask yourself to help facilitate this process is asking ourselves things like, is there an alternative way that I could respond to this situation? Am I falling into a thinking trap here? Now, what I mean by a thinking trap is really, really common cognitive processes like jumping to conclusions or engaging in a bit of good old mind reading, where we're thinking we know exactly how someone's feeling or thinking, and assuming that that's the case. We might be engaging in a bit of kind of all or nothing or black and white thinking, where it's really kind of there's no in between. Or being really kind of personalizing a situation and blaming ourselves for something as well. So that's what I'd call a thinking trap. And another really useful thing to ask ourselves is, will this matter in a week's time? Will it matter in a month's time? Will it matter in a year's time? To help give us that perspective of the situation. Now, asking ourselves all of these questions, the idea of that is it's getting us to see, is there a different way we could respond to that situation that is going to impact on our emotions at the end of it? Because it's going to change us feeling, incredibly anxious, stressed, angry, etc., which isn't going to be very helpful for us. Yes, Tricia, this is all being recorded, so it will be up on our CiC website afterwards. Yes, of course. The other thing we can do is we can think about, I'm having that thought that, I'm overwhelmed, or it's just too much at the moment, or, I'm really struggling. We can either choose to accept that thought, or we can choose to challenge it and potentially think about, do we have evidence to support that thought? Especially if you get into a loop of, oh, thanks, Harry. especially if you get into a loop of, negative thoughts such as, I am useless, I'm no good at my job, I'm no good at being a parent, that kind of thinking loop. That's where we can ask ourselves, well, do I actually have evidence to support that? And that can often help us challenge those thoughts. Do we need to forget a past experience to help build resilience? The past is the past, but negative thoughts play in the mind, which will never, ever happen. Great question. Thank you for asking that, Andrew. Um, uh, in terms of, I think the key word that I'm reading there is forget about a past experience. I don't think we necessarily need to forget, but I think it's about if we're noticing that we're ruminating on past experience or past challenges or regrets potentially, if we're ruminating that and really struggling to let go of that, that's an indicator that we might need to unpack that a little bit more. And thinking about, what impact is that having on you in the present moment? Because if it's holding you back, and impacting on, how you then approach new situations, then that will have an impact there. Yeah, but absolutely, it's not easy there, as you mentioned, Karen. So all of this around that regulation of emotions is really, really important for that in the moment kind of stress management and how we respond. Pop in the chat if you've got any other tips and tricks that you use to regulate your emotions. It might be things like, you get in a bit of a heated exchange and you might, just take 5 before you respond to something. In a work context, you might receive an email that is kind of less than ideal, and instead of kind of frantically typing away a response that might not be exactly the most appropriate or helpful response, might be, all right, let's take a walk around the block, come back, and you'll notice that the way you respond is probably going to be different. Yeah, exercise, play music loud, think about a nice thing I can do that will shrink my focus on the negative thing. Tidying up, yeah, deep breathing. Oh, fantastic strategies coming through here. Yeah, doing a bit of housework, pause before responding. And all of this is super, super useful. So it's thinking about how we can buy ourselves some time to re-engage, think clearly about how to progress through that situation. Yes, absolutely. Stepping away from the situation, breathing from the stomach. Yeah, Trisha, absolutely. So I always find putting my hand on my tummy and doing some breathing and really making sure that we're pushing our tummy in and out ensures that we're not just doing short, sharp breaths. We're really getting down. Yeah. And change my environment, Lauren. Yeah. So stepping out, making a cup of tea. Absolutely. The next strategy that I want to talk you through is realistic optimism. Now, again, pop in the chat if this is something that you've heard of before. Yeah, isn't it amazing, Ruth, how much breathing it is so powerful. So realistic optimism is not about just being happy and optimistic all of the time, but staying optimistic during challenging periods can be difficult, but maintaining a hopeful outlook is a really important part of resiliency. So what you're dealing with in that present moment is likely to be really difficult and challenging, but it's important that we think about, well, how can we be hopeful about the future, and what are some of those things that we can hold on to. So positive thinking doesn't mean ignoring the problem and kind of putting our head in the sand. It is really understanding that setbacks and challenges are temporary, and that we're also confident in our skills and our abilities to combat those challenges. Oh yes, I think that's a great one. What would you say to a friend? I think I'm reading this right. What would you, a really useful strategy is, if a friend came up to me with this challenge, what advice would I give them? And then often taking that advice can be the most useful strategy, because we're often our harshest critic. So realistic optimism is not blind positivity. It is, the analogy I like to use, it is like preparing for rain, but hoping for sunshine. Now, if you love the rain and you love the cold, then let's flip that around. But for me, it is thinking, yes, let's have a backup plan and we'll prepare for those dark, gloomy days. But we're also hopeful that that won't be the end result, and that won't be all the time. So it's knowing that, yes, there will be setbacks, there will be challenges in life, but I also back myself to get through that. It's also ensuring that we spend time in advance, so proactively bolstering our resources to manage those unexpected challenges. Now, resources might be your social network, your friends and family, so nurturing those connections, so that again, then when we have challenges, we've already got those trusted relationships. It might also be things like looking after our physical health as well. So all of those are resources, because the more resources that we have means that when we're experiencing challenge and when we're called on more, that balance of demands and resources isn't out of whack. If we think right back to that stress curve at the start, all about demands and resources there is how we experience stress. Often we can play out all of the what ifs in terms of the negative outcomes, go down all of the different rabbit holes in our mind around possible worst case scenario, what might happen, but being careful that we're also thinking about what are the positive ones as well. What are the positive scenarios and outcomes there? Yeah, absolutely, Marie. So being grateful for the little things that go well as well, really celebrating those small wins. Now, we will naturally sit somewhere along this continuum. Again, there is some kind of genetic portion there, but absolutely there's an opportunity for us to shift that, and our experiences will definitely shape that. But reflecting on where you naturally sit, again, having that awareness around how do we naturally kind of appraise and respond to situations. Also, you might have, heard of that kind of half cup full, half cup empty kind of mindset. But really ensuring that as much as possible, we're not getting caught in that really pessimistic, negative rut. So we're thinking about what are those small positives that we can hold on to. There was some research done looking at a weight loss study, and they had a whole bunch of individuals that signed up to a weight loss study, and they asked people two questions at the start of the study. The first one was, do you think you'll succeed? Now, individuals that responded yes, they think they will succeed, were much more successful in meeting their outcomes to those that already thought that they wouldn't succeed up front. So that's that difference between optimism and pessimism there. The second question they asked, though, was, do you think it'll be easy? Now, what do you think? Do you think it was the people that thought it would be easy or thought it would be difficult that had the greatest success? What do you think? Yeah, absolutely. So it's those ones that thought, no, it won't necessarily be an easy road. They're the ones that had the greatest success in meeting their targets in that weight loss study. And I think that again really reinforces this idea that it's not about blind optimism, it's about realistic optimism. Now, again, if you've got any further questions on that, pop them in the chat. But I hope that concept makes sense there for you. The last thing I want to touch on is the importance of social connection when it comes to resilience. Now, what do we think? Quantity or quality is more important when it comes to social connection? Absolutely. Quality, 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 quality. All the chat is going wild. Um, Definitely quality over quantity when it comes to social connection. Um, and again, there's been lots of research looking into that, and even some research that has found, people with strong social connection, and again, might only be 2 or 3 really, really strong relationships, actually live longer as well. Looking at some longitudinal studies there. So it's thinking about how do we ensure that we're nurturing those relationships, also spending time with people that are aligned with our values. If I go back to that, the values exercise that we were talking early, ensuring that we are surrounding ourselves with people that also mirror a lot of those values that are important to us. Um, Utilize the technology as well that is available to us, especially if you're working remotely, or unable to travel and see family and friends that might be in different parts of the world to you. So thinking about, I've never used FaceTime more, especially I am now certainly on the other side of the world, away from my family in Australia. So thinking about what are those opportunities to utilize things like FaceTime, MS Teams, WebEx, all of that with our work colleagues as well. Social support is really fantastic for giving us that perspective as well, to help us regulate those emotions. Often, we'll go to our friends and our family for that guidance, and they'll help us kind of soften our approach. Again, they'll often remind us that, hang on a minute, how did you jump to that? You absolutely, you've been through difficulty before. This is nothing compared to what you've, overcome in your life, and they'll often really be our biggest advocates there. It also gives us an opportunity to express and offer comfort and love, which is really important to us as humans. So thinking about, how do you maintain those relationships? They don't just happen, unfortunately. Again, we need to put in work to those relationships, and maintain them. So again, think about, maybe if there's one person today that you can reach out to, that's going to be helpful. And then before we wrap up, I just really wanted to touch on how we're going to embed this stuff. So what's that long-term success when it comes to resilience? We need to ensure that we have consistency in our approach and embed these habits. Now, habits are formed by repeatedly presenting a behavior in front of a cue, and we actually kind of match those behaviors together, and we form what they call cue behavior associations. We want to be realistic here. So change one behavior at a time and really focus on that in isolation, instead of just, an all or nothing approach. And it's the same thing if we think about, sustained kind of diet change. If we say, I'm never going to eat sweets again, I'm never going to drink alcohol again, we'll often find that we'll fall over shorter than if we say, well, what's kind of a realistic approach here? So start small and build up to those broader goals there. Habit change, there's a bit of kind of debate over how long it takes to form new habits, but roughly we find about 30 days is the minimum it takes to embed a new habit. But sometimes it can take longer. So set reminders to do something for every day for 1 month, and keep that consistency. It shouldn't be an onerous task if it's those small, realistic things. And identify what's motivating you, and also celebrate your wins as well. So ensure you're giving yourself a pat on the back, and giving yourself that positive feedback. I want you to think about, we've covered a fair bit today, and I know it was a jam-packed session, but what's one thing that you can start doing right now that this webinar potentially has taught you, or something from one of your friends in the chat. What's one thing that you can start doing to build your resilience? What's one thing that you can continue doing that, again, that you might already be doing, and this has just reinforced or reminded you to do that? And what's one thing that you can stop doing that potentially is getting in the way? And that might be, falling into thinking traps. It might be being too hard on myself. So what's one thing? Start, continue, and stop. So I wanted to, again, pop them in the chat if you want to share and hold yourself accountable as well. It's always fantastic. And I just wanted to briefly remind you that you do all have access to CiC, which is your EAP provider. So that's that one-on-one counselling support. And I'll pop the details is up on the screen there. But you also have access to the Well Online portal, which has a fantastic whole bunch of different tip sheets, resources. So really think about, how you can utilize what's available. And if there's any more kind of additional support, have a look on CiC's website. Harry has just popped in the chat the YouTube channel. There's lots of different webinars from the past kind of year that Harry has done on a whole range of different topics. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for all of your engagement this morning, a whole kind of 150 of you. I hope you have taken away something from this morning's session. And I'll stick around for another couple of minutes if you've got any questions. But thank you so much. And yes, please get up, stretch your legs, do one thing for yourself today, and have a lovely, lovely weekend. Thanks, everyone.